first question that we got submitted for this Q&A, which came in from Damien on Instagram, who asked, how can we get American media to talk about climate change more? I don't know if you want to like kick us off, Pearl, but I think extreme weather is definitely a good tie.
Yeah, I mean, I always get such mixed information about this because you'll see these disappointing reports that climate change being mentioned in news has declined in recent years. Um, but then for example, I was having a conversation with our partners at Climate Central yesterday, and they've been overwhelmed with interview requests this past week to really and this organization, Climate Central, has all this data that can showcase the links between the rapid acceleration of Hurricane Melissa and global warming caused by humans. So it's nice. It's it's not comforting, but it is good to know that those connections were really being made very strongly the past week, in the major news organizations. Yeah, it is. I think part of the problem. Well, I mean, there's the politicization of climate change, and there we know of many meteorologists who've mentioned climate change during their reports and have received death threats because of that. Even I think being fired at times. So there's obviously like that fear, but also just breaking down the science in a simplistic way. How can you do that without like losing people's attention? And I think, for many years it was told in such an abstract way.
Mhm.
Um, like talking about the polar ice caps melting and polar bears dying. All of that is very sad, but that all seems very far away.
Totally.
And I think one thing that we have all tried to do is really bring the stories to the backyards of everybody, and that's not hard to do because it's happening in pretty much everybody's backyard. And then, yeah, having these partnerships with organizations like Climate Central that can really just break down that connection so easily, a lot of times in like a beautiful graphic,
Mhm.
has been really, really great. I mean, obviously, I think we've used Climate Central's data. Our meteorologist Bob and Jeff have used it in pretty much every article they've written this week, I think.
Mhm.
And that showcasing that the water was between 800 and 900 times warmer,
Mhm.
or likely, that I always get tripped up on this one. The temperature was made more 800 times more likely because of human caused climate change. And then they also have the increase in wind power,
Mhm.
and the hurricane and everything. So having that accessibility and that attribution science there, um, is really helpful. And I think what happens is people get a little scared
Totally.
in trying to report on that stuff, and sometimes aren't knowledgeable enough to know that they're not saying that they're not knowledgeable enough, but might not be aware of the resources that are out there that help communicate the science in an accurate and effective way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think too, like at a local level, like I don't know, there's so few local journalists now, and everybody is overworked and overwhelmed. But also covering climate now has a lot of resources. So like regardless of a journalist beat, like even if you're covering high school sports, right? Like there's a climate connection there. Because I don't know, high school football players playing in extreme heat are experiencing a lot of health impacts.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think like the more that we can help people connect to these resources that like, yeah, make it really timely and topical, the kind of like breaking news of a storm or a heat wave, and how to bring that into reporting like easily, I think the more coverage we'll see. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we're also up against the like politicization of climate change and increasingly news organizations being bought by right leaning or, fossil fuel connected interests. So,
Mm. Yeah, so yeah, just we have a lot stacked against us. But I think also sometimes people think that these stories might be boring,
mhm,
and forget that there are just so many ways, so many powerful storytelling techniques, and just so many powerful stories out there that you can link it that can be linked to climate change. Yeah, I just and it, one thing that we've also been talking about is it doesn't exist in a silo.
totally.
Like, we're always talking about immigration, we're talking about health, we're talking about economy, like all the time. It doesn't it affects everything, so you can be an immigration reporter or economics reporter and still be covering climate.
Mhm,
And yeah, so like there are so many stories out there. There's plenty of stories still to be told. And I think another thing is there's so many positive stories to be told. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, it's just like everyone has enough bad news going on. They don't want like that fatigue. But there are so many great stories about communities being empowered and making a difference, and individuals making a difference. And um, you know, I think sometimes the bigger news organizations fall into the trap of just talking about victimhood and climate change, and it feels like a trope, and there's just way more. There's way better ways of telling